My name is Henry Hoffman. I've always been a private person. I don't share much about my life online, and I certainly don't post pictures of myself. But what happened to me? I can't keep it to myself anymore. If I don't tell someone, I think I'll go insane. I haven't slept in 3 days. My body is exhausted, my eyes heavy, but every time I close them, I see asterisk and asterisk. His face is etched into my mind, haunting me, tormenting me. No one believes me when I tell them what happened that night in the abandoned house. They think I'm crazy. But I know the truth. The spirit of a dead teenager, someone I once knew, has cursed me. His name was Jack Howard, and after his death, he became known as Asterisk Black Jack Asterisk. Jack was a quiet kid, painfully quiet. He didn't have any friends. Every day at lunch, he sat alone at a table, his face blank, like he'd given up on life. He wore the same clothes every day, a dark green t-shirt and dark red pants. His long, curly brown hair always hid most of his face, but you could still see his deep blue eyes, empty and distant. He was the perfect target for bullies, and they never left him alone. I felt bad for him, sure, but I never did anything to help. None of us did. It wasn't our problem, or so we told ourselves. Then one day, Jack didn't show up to school. Our algebra teacher, Mr. Anderson, made an announcement as soon as class started. His voice was cold, detached. Jack Howard won't be coming to school today or ever again. His house caught fire last night. The firefighters found his body, mutilated. His face was covered in black ink. He was murdered. The room went silent. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Asterisk, who would do something like that to Jack? Asterisk, he never hurt anyone. He didn't deserve this. The news spread fast. By midday, the whole town knew. The Howard family abandoned the house, leaving it empty and decaying. A week later, the killer was caught. When I heard the name, my blood turned to ice. It was Timothy Thompson, one of Jack's bullies. The worst one. He'd always been vicious, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. Timothy had severe mental disorders, psychopathy, schizophrenia, delusions of grandeur. He'd stopped taking his medication, and his twisted mind convinced him that Jack didn't deserve to live, that he needed to free him from his misery. So, one night, he broke into Jack's house with a knife, gasoline, and black ink. He set the house on fire, tortured Jack, and mutilated his face before covering it in ink. By the time the fire trucks arrived, it was too late. Timothy was arrested a few days later and sentenced to life in prison. After that, the rumors started. People said Jack's spirit haunted the house, that he'd become Asterisk Black Jack Asterisk, named after the ink that covered his face. They said anyone who entered the house would suffer the same fate. My best friend Michael and I had always been drawn to abandoned places, especially ones with a dark history. It was a risky hobby, but we loved the thrill. So when Michael called me one Saturday and suggested we explore the Howard house at 3 a.m., I wasn't entirely surprised. But I was uneasy. "Are you serious?" I asked. "You really want to mess with something like that? You've heard the stories." Michael laughed. "Come on, Henry. You don't actually believe that stuff, do you? It's just an old house. Or are you scared?" I hated when he teased me like that. "I'm not scared. I just think it's stupid to tempt fate. Then prove it. Be there at 3 a.m. I agreed, mostly out of pride, but I regretted it almost immediately. Still, I told myself it would be fine. It was just an abandoned house like all the others we'd explored. I didn't tell my family where I was going. At 2:45 a.m., I grabbed my gear and slipped out. When I got to the house, Michael was already there, armed with professional ghost hunting equipment like we were filming some kind of paranormal show. He pried the door open, and a wave of dread washed over me. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but I followed him inside. I didn't know it then, but that decision would change everything. The house was dark and cold, the air thick with the smell of decay. Our flashlights cut through the shadows, revealing broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, and layers of dust. The silence was oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. We moved slowly, our footsteps echoing through the empty halls. "This place is creepy as hell," Michael whispered, his voice trembling despite his earlier bravado. Yeah, I muttered, my eyes darting around. Let's just get this over with. We made our way to what used to be Jack's bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, a chill ran down my spine. The room was small, with a broken bed, a shattered mirror, and a desk covered in black stains. My flashlight caught something on the wall, a handprint, dark and smeared, like it had been made with ink. What the hell? I muttered, stepping closer. That's when I heard it, a faint whisper, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time. It was a voice, low and guttural, repeating the same word over and over. Asterisk leave. 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 Asterisk. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Michael, do you hear that? He didn't answer. I turned around, and my blood ran cold. Michael was gone. The hallway outside the room was empty. Michael? I called, my voice shaking. This isn't funny. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. Asterisk leave, 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 asterisk. I stumbled backward, my flashlight flickering. The shadows in the room seemed to shift, to move, like they were alive. And then I saw him. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. He was tall and thin, his face obscured by long, curly hair. He wore a dark green t-shirt and dark red pants. His hands were covered in black ink, dripping onto the floor. It was Jack. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My legs gave way and I collapsed to the floor, my flashlight rolling out of my hand. The figure stepped closer, and I could see his face now, or what was left of it. His eyes were hollow, his nose and ears missing, his skin blackened and charred. Ink oozed from his wounds, pooling around his feet. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come, asterisk, he whispered, his voice echoing in my mind. Asterisk, this is my home. You don't belong here, asterisk. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned and ran, stumbling through the dark hallway, the whispers growing louder behind me. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting my face like a slap. I looked back at the house, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the window, watching me. Michael was waiting by the car, his face pale and drawn. Where the hell did you go? He demanded. Where did asterisk go? I shot back. You disappeared. He shook his head. I didn't disappear. You just ran off. What happened in there? I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could think about was Jack's face, his voice, the ink dripping from his hands. That was 3 days ago. Since then, I haven't been able to sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. I hear his voice. He's in my dreams, in my thoughts, in my nightmares. I don't know how to make it stop. All I know is that I shouldn't have gone into that house. Some doors are better left unopened. And now, Jack won't let me forget. Story 2. Laura stepped into her new home, her heart brimming with hope. The apartment was everything she had dreamed of, spacious, bathed in golden afternoon light streaming through large windows. From her room, she could gaze out at a vibrant garden teeming with life, towering trees, bursts of colorful flowers, fluttering butterflies, and birds that sang sweet melodies at dawn. Occasionally, a curious butterfly would drift in through the open window, filling her with a quiet joy. Her home was a sanctuary filled with lush plants that spilled onto her private terrace. There, she could bask in the sun, feel the breeze, and listen to the rain, all while her dogs lounged contentedly beside her. It seemed like the perfect escape, a slice of paradise in the heart of the bustling city. But when night fell, the dream shattered. The building where Laura lived was flanked by 2 bars. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the music erupted in a deafening roar that shook the walls. Laughter, shouts, and the relentless thump of bass drowned out any semblance of peace, keeping her awake until the early hours of the morning. She tried everything, thick curtains, earplugs, white noise machines, but nothing could silence the chaos. The worst was when the neighbors revved their modified cars, their powerful speakers rattling her very bones. Laura felt like she couldn't even hear her own thoughts. How could anyone sleep through this? Was she the only one suffering? After a week of sleepless nights, exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Should she leave? She had poured all her savings into this apartment. Moving out would mean giving up her dream of independence and returning to her mother's house. It wasn't fair. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She checked the security camera and saw an older woman waiting outside, her face kind and lined with the marks of a life well lived. Laura opened the door. "Hello, dear," the woman said warmly. "I'm Margarita, your neighbor. I wanted to welcome you." In her hands, she held a small box from a local bakery. Laura returned her smile and invited her in. Over tea and pastries, they chatted easily. Margarita was around her mother's age, and Laura found her easy to talk to. Eventually, the conversation turned to the noise. "Doesn't it bother you?" Laura asked, frustration creeping into her voice. Margarita's expression darkened. She sighed and looked down. "My husband and I have struggled with it too," she admitted. "We installed soundproof windows to help, but even then, we still hear it sometimes." Laura's eyes widened. Soundproof windows? That was an expense she couldn't afford. "Well, why hasn't anyone done anything?" she protested. "It's not fair that we have to spend more money just to have peace in our own homes." Margarita's gaze grew distant, and Laura noticed something in her eyes, not just exhaustion, but fear. "There's nothing we can do," Margarita whispered. "Not against the Echeverry family." Laura frowned, confused by the fear in her neighbor's voice. Margarita began to explain. 4 years ago, when Margarita and her husband Roberto moved in, they too had been tormented by the noise. Frustrated, Margarita called the police multiple times, believing the authorities would help. She gave her name, thinking nothing of it. But the complaints went unanswered. The police never came. Instead, someone else did. The morning after a particularly loud night, a knock came at their door. On the security camera, they saw a young man, tall, with a mustache. Margarita opened the door, and the man introduced himself with a stiff smile. "Gustavo Echeverry." "I heard the noise from the bars bothers you," he said, his tone deceptively friendly. Thinking she had found an ally, Margarita vented her frustrations. Gustavo listened, his expression sympathetic. But when she finished, his smile turned cold, his eyes hard. "Listen, old lady," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong. You can call whoever you want, but no one will help you. Either learn to sleep through it or move out." Margarita's blood ran cold. Before she could respond, Gustavo lifted his shirt, revealing a gun tucked into his belt. He smirked as she froze in fear. When she tried to close the door, he blocked it with his foot and pushed his way inside. Margarita stumbled back, bumping into the living room table. Her husband, Roberto, looked up from his book, startled. Gustavo grabbed Margarita's chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. His voice was a chilling whisper. "Try to live quietly. I don't like being the bad guy, and you remind me of my grandmother. But you're not her. But I wouldn't hesitate to take care of you. Both of you." He released her abruptly, turned to Roberto, and shook his hand with a fake smile, squeezing it painfully before letting go. Then he left, slamming the door behind him. Laura was stunned. How could this be possible? Surely the building owner could do something. But Margarita explained that the owner had sold the property years ago to someone connected to the Echeverry family. No one dared to intervene. Everyone had been threatened or harassed by the Echeverry enforcers, and the authorities were seemingly bought off. Margarita left after giving Laura a comforting hug. When the door closed, Laura sank into a chair, overwhelmed. How had she ended up in this nightmare disguised as paradise? Weeks passed, and Laura's exhaustion deepened. She slept in on her days off, but her work days were a blur of fatigue. She felt like a zombie, barely functioning despite the endless cups of coffee she drank. She was too tired to fight anymore. One Saturday morning, Laura headed to the bakery, her mood sour. "Damn Echeverry," she muttered under her breath. As she picked out her favorite bread and a slice of poppy seed cake, she noticed a man in line ahead of her. He was tall, with thick black hair and broad shoulders. His profile was strikingly handsome, and when he turned, his smile made her heart skip a beat. He caught her staring and chuckled softly, not unkindly. Flustered, Laura introduced herself. The man smiled and said his name was Sebastian. He explained that he had just moved into the area the night before and was out to buy breakfast, just like her. "Where do you live?" Laura asked, curious. "In the Golden Alps building," he replied. Laura's eyes lit up. "We're neighbors. I'm in 313. I'm in 406, Sebastian said with a charming grin. They walked back to the building together, sharing the elevator. As Laura stepped out on her floor, Sebastian hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to have breakfast with me?" Laura smiled and nodded, taking his hand and leading him to her apartment. As they entered, her 3 little dogs greeted them excitedly. Sebastian knelt to pet them, his gentle touch warming Laura's heart. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. They sat down for breakfast, the steam from their coffee cups curling into the air, a plate of sliced fruit between them. As they ate, Sebastian asked about the area and the building's residents. Laura eagerly described the perks, the closeness to nature, the fresh air, the serene atmosphere that seemed to cradle the place. But as she spoke, her expression shifted. She remembered the nights, the blaring music, the shouting, the fights, the chaos that erupted from the bars owned by the Echeverry family. Sebastian's face darkened as she detailed the noise. His jaw tightened, his brows furrowed in a mix of anger and something else, disgust, perhaps. Laura noticed and asked if he was okay. He sighed, hesitated, then slowly removed a small device from his left ear. Laura stared, confused. "It's a noise-canceling earplug," he explained with a faint chuckle. "I've had phonophobia since I was a child, an irrational fear of loud, sudden noises. These help me cope. That's why I moved here. I thought it would be peaceful." His frustration was palpable. "I visited during the day, but I never came at night. I had no idea." Laura reached for his hand, her voice warm with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Sebastian. The noise drives me crazy, too. I can't sleep. I'm exhausted all the time. I can't imagine how hard it must be for you." Sebastian's eyes softened at her concern. "Has anyone tried to do something? Call the police? Talk to the building manager?" Laura sighed, weary. She told him about Mrs. Margarita, how the building had been sold to a partner of the Echeverry family, and how residents had been threatened or harassed when they complained. Sebastian listened in disbelief. "How can they get away with this?" he muttered more to himself. "Who are these people?" Laura had no answers. She called emergency services before, but nothing changed. She never gave her name, fearing retaliation. The conversation ended with Sebastian excusing himself to finish unpacking. Laura didn't take it personally. His discomfort was understandable. They parted with tired smiles. Later, Laura took her dogs to the park. She sat on a bench trying to enjoy a moment of peace when a man sat beside her. She recognized him, an Echeverry. Her stomach turned. "How are you enjoying the neighborhood?" he asked, his tone dripping with mockery. Laura forced a smile. "It's beautiful, though the mosquitoes at night keep me awake." He chuckled. "That's part of the charm. Like a rat trap. You can't build paradise without residents, after all. You have to train the rats to stay." Laura's disgust was evident, but he only smiled. "I'm an expert on their behavior," he continued. "And there are rewards for the best rats. You could be one of them." "I'd never do that," Laura spat. "You're sick." His amusement vanished, replaced by something colder. He stood, leaned in, and whispered, "Don't say I didn't warn you, little rat." Laura hurried back to the building, her heart pounding. From his window in apartment 406, Sebastian watched the exchange, his jaw clenched. He knew this wasn't over. That night, chaos erupted. Sebastian, driven by a fury Laura had never seen, confronted the Echeverrys. She watched in horror as he attacked, his movements precise and merciless. The bar became a scene of carnage, and then an inferno. Sebastian doused the place in gasoline and set it ablaze, his face eerily calm as the flames consumed everything. Laura called emergency services, her voice trembling. "A man is killing everyone. He's setting a bar on fire. Please, Send someone. But the fire consumed the bar, the Echeverris, and any evidence of what had happened. The police never came. The Echeverris reign of fear had ensured no one would call for help until it was too late. Laura left the next morning, her dogs in tow. She didn't look back. She drove to her mother's house, far from the nightmare she called home. She vowed never to trust the daylight illusion of a place again. Night reveals the truth, and she had seen it, traps disguised as paradises, rats who thought themselves untouchable until the fire came. Because night always comes, and you never know what it will reveal.